keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Seculo.
Welcome to Seculo. This is Logan Seculo, joined by executive producer Will Haynes, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to be hitting a lot of topics. We're going to have some great guests, a lot coming up, Will.
That's right, and we really wanted to focus on some of the foreign policy stuff today. Earlier this week, we focused a lot on some domestic things, on some politics, whether it be 2024 or the bank issue. But we also don't want to neglect that there's a lot going on in the foreign policy world. And a lot of that has to do with China. We mentioned earlier in the week that China is making these ties, these big ties with Russia and with facilitating a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we're going to have some of our experts on to kind of break down a lot of this stuff that's been going on with China and what it means really for the American people.
Yeah, and we couldn't have these experts like Mike Pompeo and Rick Grenell. You know, you have incredible people from previous political administrations, White Houses, that have come aboard with the ACLJ, and it doesn't happen without supporters like you. So they're going to be joining us later in this broadcast, but we are in the middle of our matching challenge, and I don't want to lose sight of that as well, which we can't do this without you. So if you have a minute and you are thinking about where you're going to put your resources, the ACLJ is a great place to do it. All you have to do is go to aclj.org, make any donation. If you $5, $25, $50, so on and so on and so on, any donation made is matched by another donor who is out there ready to match. Essentially, they have pledged that amount, and they are waiting for your donation. Once your donation is made, it unlocks their matching donation. So really great. It's a great time to support. If you ever thought about supporting our work, this is a perfect time to do it. Again, later on in the broadcast, we are going to be talking with Mike Pompeo and Rick Grenell. We're also going to be talking about what's going on, as you said, in China, what's going on the international front. We do spend a lot of time on the work that we do domestically, but we have offices around the world. Some we can talk about, some we don't talk about. But you can find out so much more information. You can watch all of our incredible videos. You can read incredible blogs and news stories by some of these top leaders by just going to aclj.org. It's really simple. Will, you go to aclj.org, download all of this content, read, get engaged. Not only just support the work, obviously follow us on our social media platforms and all of that, but there is a treasure trove of content there that I think a lot of people maybe take for granted.
And a lot of the experts you hear on air here or on our social channels also are writing for the website. So not only Mike Pompeo, but Harry Hutchison, Wes Smith, Jordan, and your dad have articles up all the time about all this content, about all these stories, about all these policy issues that we care about and are engaged on, as well as things like the victory we saw this week where we got a consent decree against the Smithsonian. None of that can happen without your help at aclj.org by making that gift.
Well, in this broadcast, we try to break down a lot of it, and same with on the website, into sort of, terms we can all understand. It's easy. We're a legal organization to get caught up in sort of the legal mumbo jumbo that maybe you're not comfortable with. You read and you go, I don't know what this means, what that means. We have a great team of writers who take some of these expert voices also and make sure it's actually understandable. That's something that I find very important. We have great writers who can break it down for you and for me. So us who are not lawyers can really understand the incredible work that's going on and find out stuff about like what's happening in China, the influence that they're having on our nation, and what we can do to help change that and change minds here at the ACLJ. Again, I want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ by going to aclj.org. Go there right now. Make a donation. Your gifts are doubled this month. It doesn't mean when you give $10, you're getting charged $20. It means when you give $10, another person, another incredible donor, another incredible ACLJ member matches that donation, and we could not do it without you. Again, coming up later in the broadcast, Rick Grenell will be joining us. You always enjoy when he is on. A lot of great information coming from him and from Mike Pompeo. Again, two of our members of the ACLJ who've been with us for the last few years, and we couldn't do it without you. So again, visit aclj.org. If you're watching on Rumble right now, I encourage you to hit that follow button to tell your friends, because we're growing and growing on Rumble. I want to thank them for all of their support over the last few years. An incredible operation going on there. Really like those guys over at Rumble. All right, we'll be right back with more on Seculo.
When we see something, when we hear something, when we're concerned about an issue, we don't just talk about it. We do something about it. And that goes to our Government Accountability Project.
If we allow leaders in Washington, D.C. to make decisions behind closed doors, unaccountable to the people, then we are going to get skewed and corrupt decisions.
There are lots of other places that do lots of important work for America, but the ACLJ has taken up a lane which is irreplaceable.
The Freedom of Information Act, that's a statute that allows us to get information from the government. Starts with a letter from our offices in Washington to these agencies. And it says, give us this information on these topics. And generally, they don't. And then we go to court.
We go through a series of lengthy negotiations back and forth about what they'll give or what they won't give. We may get tons of information that's redacted, and we have to then go back and say, you redacted too much. We can't really find out what you're giving us because it makes no sense. So it goes through a process of litigation.
That is how you get information, and that office is going to be more active now more than ever.
The ACLJ has been extremely active in vigorously seeking to hold these bureaucrats accountable. We have filed hundreds of FOIA requests. We have received over 20,000 pages of documents in our litigation.
Holding them accountable, holding the Biden administration accountable so that all Americans are able to have faith in their government.
We will up our efforts. We will not stop.
You're finding a nugget in a gold mine. Occasionally you'll come up with something that is really a bombshell, but you have to persist in doing it, and that's what we do.
That's a little bit of what we do through our Office of Government Accountability, and of course that comes under our Office of Government Affairs. So your support of the ACLJ supports all of that.
We're joined by Secretary Pompeo, our ACLJ Senior Counsel for Global Affairs. And Secretary, I want to get right into it. A lot of different topics I wanted to hit with you today. And first off is that when President Biden took office, we had inflation at 1.4%. It's now at 6.4%. Yesterday, he released what I would consider a disastrous budget that calls for $6.9 trillion in spending. Even his really outrageous tax increases, 25%. And they always say for the wealthiest. And you start looking at that, you say, oh, that's a lot of small business owners that would have a 25% mandatory tax. How do you see this all playing out? Because there was some discussion, Secretary Pompeo, yesterday that maybe some things in the economy that we were coming out of some moments, that maybe this would hold off on some interest rate hikes by the Fed to let people kind of settle in. And then you get a number like this, and I think and with 6.9 trillion spending that can't even be paid for with extremely high tax rates. And again, I think it scares the American consumer. It certainly scares the American employee and employer.
Well, Jordan, let's just take one step back. We know this is the case. Every family knows it's the case that you can't spend more than you have. And what President Biden is proposing to do is spend an additional $6 or $8 trillion, depending on how you count it, in spite of the fact he's going to try and take more money from every family. And he says it won't impact people under $400,000. If you're working for a small business that makes $1 million a year, this is going to impact you because your employer is going to have to make a really hard decision about whether to keep you at the company or to change the nature of what they're doing. And we know this is the wrong direction. When you have inflation, when you have prices going up for milk and eggs and all the things that ordinary families just have to have and depend upon, you know this is bad for the country. You know this is bad for those families. And the budget that has been proposed, which the good thing is it probably won't get very far, but the budget's been proposed, shares with you his vision for America, a bigger federal government and less money for families all across the country.
You know, I think Secretary Pompeo as well, it's just people, I think, look at all these economics, they say this is like their only option is let's just increase interest rate. And you get to this certain point, you start looking back historically, you go, okay, when is this going to finally stop so that people can, one, just have some stability if they are making a large purchase to know and plan, and then two, just to, again, kind of get prices back down to where they are reasonable, because the unemployment numbers, while those are, at the one side, so an uptick in the unemployment's low, more people getting hired, we still know that those wages, Secretary Pompeo, that people are making, I'm sure you're hearing this from across the country, are not covering the inflation. So while they are taking jobs because they got to pay their bills, at the same time, they're not able to pay all of their bills, or they're having to make serious cuts in their just basic lifestyle because their salary that would have covered everything a couple years ago now does not.
Jordan, it's so true. When you're just out there meeting with people who are just trying to take care of their family and get the kids into good schools or coach their little league team, all those things we do here in America, they can feel this every day. They can feel it when they fill up the tank of their car. They can feel it when they go to the grocery store. They can feel it when the monthly bill comes for their electricity, for their natural gas into their home. They can all feel it in these deep ways. And you're right, paychecks just aren't keeping up with inflation. The solution can't possibly be what President Biden is proposing. His theory of the case is take more money from the private sector and take it to Washington, D.C. That won't improve the lives of these families. I remember this so well, Jordan. Right, mortgage rates when we left 2.5 years ago, just under 2.5 years ago, were about half of what they are today. So someone who's trying to buy their first home today, their interest is going to cost double what it would have cost. That's not good for people in the great places in America that President Biden doesn't think about very often, instead of just thinking about the folks he knows in these big cities and the liberals and the elites on the coast.
We're talking to Secretary Pompeo, also former director of the CIA and a member of Congress. During a hearing this week, which was pretty interesting to say the least, Secretary Pompeo, the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, we saw Democrats, this was interesting, repeatedly lash out at a New York Times editor, Nicholas Wade, who was one of the first people to say, and I guess at that point probably didn't think it was necessarily brave to say, but just a theory that COVID likely resulted from a lab leak in Wuhan. And yesterday, the ranking member of the subcommittee, a Democrat, California Representative Raul Ruiz, essentially called Wade a racist. For saying that this originated in a lab in Wuhan. Mr. Secretary, you said time and time again, we've got to be able to hold the Chinese accountable, and that hold them accountable has to be bipartisan. Why is the radical left using the language of the Chinese to try and scare us away from blaming a nation state and trying to conflate that with blaming all people who happen to be Chinese or of Chinese origin?
It's the dangest thing, Jordan, and you and the ACLJ have been all over this from the beginning. We knew in March of 2020, 3 years ago now, that the dang virus came from the lab. And the fact that the progressive left is trying to give the Chinese Communist Party a free pass on this is absolutely mind-boggling to me. It's mind-boggling, too, that Dr. Fauci is going after the former CDC director, Dr. Redfield. Dr. Redfield and I both knew in the end of 19, beginning of 20, we knew that this came from the lab, and it's important. This isn't just a political parlor game about where this came from. To hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable, there has to be a consensus on the science, and the science is clear. This was an accidental release from the lab that the Chinese Communist Party then foisted across the world, and they have to be held accountable for that. And as long as you have Democrat congresspeople who are going to come after reporters who are just purporting basic science, we can't protect America from this happening one day again.
You know, if it happens to the reporter, it happened to Dr. Redfield. And we talked about that a lot yesterday on the broadcast, but you brought it up, Secretary Pompeo, is this idea that, when he testified with Congressman Jordan, and he said, did you ever get this note from Dr. Fauci that he received from another doctor that was close to Fauci who said, this is doesn't look like an evolutionary kind of virus. This looks like something created in a lab. Someone else wrote to him. Another colleague, a doctor, said, this would be tough to happen in nature, but certainly we could do this easily in a lab. And Redfield both times said it was never shared. They go after the New York Times editor. They were silencing the CDC director.
They had a vested interest in that, Jordan. They knew that Dr. Fauci knew that there was his money from his organization at NIH, a fellow named Peter Daszak, that you all at ACLJ have been working to solve this mystery for a long time. Peter Daszak and Dr. Fauci both knew that there had been money that came in the form of grants that made its way to that very virology institute that just wanted to protect themselves. It was a cover-up operation for sure. So that's why when Dr. Redfield came and said, here's the basic things we've seen. Sick doctors coming from the lab. Now they've disappeared journalists who are reporting on what happened to the lab. a researcher who said, hey, we really need to check out what happened as well. The Chinese Communist Party shut that all down. And when Dr. Fauci saw that, he had the exact opposite response. Dr. Redfield said, let's get to the bottom of this. And Dr. Fauci said, we can't let anybody get to the bottom of this. Let's go DEFCON 4. Let's cover this up. And that's really a threat to America.
You know what, Secretary Pompeo, as always, I appreciate you joining us. And through those questions, there's always the information I want to jump right back on, because I think, again, that silencing of just ideas is so dangerous in the United States of America. I mean, we're a country founded on the idea that you can have a theory and someone else can have a theory, and then ultimately, maybe through science and research, you figure out which theory is right or what evidence points to that one theory being more likely than the other. Secretary Pompeo, we always appreciate. Support our work. You know, we've got Secretary Pompeo on our team. We have Rick Grinnell on our team. We've got a team of attorneys and experts because of you. Donate today at ACLJ.org. Right now, we're in the middle of our matching challenge for the month of March. I know it's spring break. You're thinking about, maybe you're like President Trump and you're like thinking of the sunshines and the beaches. We all are. I know I am. But the work continues, and we really could use your support right now. All you need to do is go to ACLJ.org. You don't have to do anything extra. Just make a donation, and at that point, it essentially unlocks a matching donation. There's already a group of donors ready, and they are ready to match any donation that comes in the month of March. So look, this is the backbone of our organization. I've said this before. I want to say it again. It's not multi-million-dollar donors who come and fund this whole thing. Sure, there are great, large donors that do help, but that is not the backbone. This runs on $10, $25, $40, $50 donations. That's how all of this happens. And I know I say all of this, you could think we're in like a closet somewhere. If you could turn around and see, we are in a massive multimedia facility. We have offices in Washington, D.C. and around the world, fighting for you and fighting for your rights. So we ask you to give a donation during this month of March. I know it's tough. I know it's a tough time. I know it's economically scary when banks are collapsing and all this stuff is happening. But you have $5, we could really appreciate it even. Go to ACLJ.org. Make that donation today.
In my time in service, both as the CI director and as Secretary of State, I watched the good work that the ACLJ was doing here in the States and all across the world.
The ACLJ's work at the UN, overseas with the European Court of Justice, is incredibly important.
We have on our team lawyers, non-lawyers as well, that are policy experts. They're all engaged in foreign policy issues.
We have been focused on protecting the nation state of Israel, particularly before the United Nations.
We don't shy away from the battles that are going on at the UN and just complain about them. We actually try to go in and do something positive and actually affect change.
The risk of a incomplete or unsolid relationship within the United States of America and Israel is real.
Israel is very important to the ACLJ, and we will always fight for Israel's rights.
We had a series of cases at the European Court of Human Rights, primarily dealing with religious liberty.
And as Secretary of State, I saw this too. Nations that had more religious freedom were on firmer footing. They had better democracies.
America has always been the world leader in religious liberties, in freedom of conscience and freedom of speech.
We've taken the First Amendment, and that has been our cornerstone. It's to defend the rights of people of faith and others that are having their rights abused.
We not only hold our government accountable, but we hold other governments accountable.
You have to keep the battle going when it's not cool anymore, when it's not the number one story on TV. You have to actually be committed to fighting it out, or else you'll never win.
The ACLJ's front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. Go to ACLJ.org today. That's ACLJ.org.
There's a lot of talk about China, but that's because China's flexing its muscles throughout the world right now. I mean, threatening to get involved directly in the war in Ukraine. That was the latest kind of back and forth. And they basically, their message to the U.S. has been, you better stay out of it. And don't tell us what to do. And then they go through the litany of countries, wars that we've been involved in and conflicts we've been involved in. So they said, we don't tell you. But again, their decision making is different. They're taking potentially adversarial positions to each of our positions. So, it's becoming clearer and clearer. Again, this was not just about economic competition. That's anytime that Joe Biden tries to phrase it that way. Listen, he wouldn't be banning TikTok if it was just about an economic competitor that we have to deal with in the Chinese. It's a new China first, strengthened Chinese Communist Party, came out of COVID with even more power because the world didn't shun them. They should have been shunned by the world, but the world did not shun them. And we got a new piece up at ACLJ.org by Wes Smith. Wes joining us now. China's grand plan for defeating America. And you start, Wes, at saying defeat comes in many forms. It's not always, an outright military defeat and a technical surrender.
Yeah, China has explicitly stated that it is their plan to diminish our influence in the world, to have the world's largest military, to have the world's largest economy. They have a huge economy right now. Ours is still larger. To do all of that because, as President Xi has stated, their goal, whenever your enemy, your adversary says something like this, we probably need to take them at their word. His goal is to be the world's only remaining superpower. And they're going about this militarily and economically. Just two quick examples. Their military budget continues to increase year after year. Right now, they have about the same size Navy as we do, but with 2 aircraft carriers. They have more nuclear weapons launchers than we do. 3 years ago, they had 200 nuclear warheads. Now our CIA estimates they have about 1,000. So militarily, they are moving on. They're also buying influence militarily in South America and in Asia, Africa. They're building seaports so they can service their large navy. They intend to circumnavigate the world with their military power. They have the world's largest standing army. And so militarily they're doing that, but financially, they own us on some level. I mean, we have a $30 trillion debt that the CBO says in the next 5 to 7 years will add another $10 trillion to that. So we have $40 trillion. China already owns over $1 trillion worth of our debt. In other words, basically we're borrowing the money from them. They continue to import more goods here than we ever export to them. So, Jordan, financially and militarily, they are working towards that goal of diminishing our influence and becoming a superpower.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like, unfortunately, and we see this with Russia, and we didn't seize the moment. So communism fell, and yet we didn't seize the moment. Something failed in our approach to Russia because we're right back into conflict with call them whatever you want.
Later, it feels very similar.
Yes, and I felt like we've done the same thing with China. They opened up their economy. We thought by opening their economy, suddenly that's going to change their whole, and it's actually just made them more dangerous because of they will exploit all of our economic needs. They'll develop these apps like TikTok. They don't let their own people use them that way, but they'll keep selling it to us. It's this. I just think we opened up these countries we still have not figured that out. Like, how do we tell them, stop back or, open up your economy. Let's have more dialogue. And that's turned on us with China, where they've made these advancements that you talked about, Wes. And then Russia, they might not be called the Soviet Union anymore, but they are acting in that aggressive way as well.
Yeah.
Something just did not work in what we expected to be the changes or the downfall. It may have had temporary, but it seemed like long term, still their goal is how do we take down the U.S.?
Yeah, and they have combined this goal with Russia and Iran. Yeah. Just in the last 2 years, Russia and Iran and China have signed agreements with one another. The one between China and Russia is called a no-limits partnership. They have done joint military exercises. Russia, China, and Iran joint military exercises because they do intend to defeat the United States. And again, as I said in my blog on our website, it doesn't necessarily mean defeat on the battlefield and a formal surrender, but the defeat economically and militarily and influence-wise is just as real and just as far-reaching.
And at what point have we gotten it wrong? Where, we talk about Iran, we usually we make that distinction. We see they have this horrible regime. It's not all the people there. But, I see some people about China say, well, it's about the Chinese Communist Party. It's not all people in China. That may be the case. But when you have the largest standing army in the world, it's not just 20 people. No, this is a gigantic force. The Chinese, even if all Chinese don't benefit. Yeah. Hundreds of millions do. We have to wrap our head around this a little differently because I think we westernize everything. We always say, don't make an enemy out of everybody. But when we've gone to war, you killed all the Germans. Right? You didn't say, it's only the people that had this specific, everything was free, everything was a target at a certain point when you go to a full-scale war. Because the country is supporting it. And I think that's what I've talked about, is these moments where Russians didn't have to support bringing in another dictator, and they did bring in another dictator. And they're not rapidly rising up to overthrow him. No. Because there are enough Russians to overthrow him. There's enough Chinese people to overthrow that Chinese Communist Party. Yeah. They're not. Well, again, it's a different way of thinking. It's a different mindset. Because we think everybody thinks like we do. I think. Right, and I think that's right. I think that's a big part of the American experiment, and the problem with it can be sometimes too is that we westernize everything with that. Let's go phone calls quickly because you've been on hold for a long time. Naomi's calling in Alabama on line 1. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for taking my call. I would like to say that I believe the government, our government, is spying on us through our devices and through our apps, and I believe that is why they want to ban TikTok, because that is a gateway for China to get into our government system.
Oh, you mean it's TikTok, one, if they want into your government systems, that's to spy on the U.S. government, but two, I mean, they're taking every one of your keystrokes and they're giving it to the Chinese Communist Party. If Facebook was found to be giving that to the U.S. government, they would lose all their users. Facebook would have a series, not all of them, maybe, but they would probably. Rick said a lot of people take the risk knowing that they like the content. So I'm not. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, I don't think that. I think there's an issue with spying. A device that made it easier for all actors to spy, and you sign a lot of agreements. But at the end of the day, if these American companies were exposed to be giving all of our data over, every one of your keystrokes, over to the FBI or the CIA, then yeah, I think those companies would be facing some serious trouble, even continue to have enough people to operate. Even with Rick said, with the balance, I think when it's right here at home, that would even make it more dangerous. Yeah, I think so. I think that the danger in there, and the danger in TikTok is, again, we're all being very easily exposed to what's happening. When your federal government starts making these kind of moves, and when your state governments that are more, when the red states start moving, and then all of a sudden the blue states do as well, you got an interesting situation at hand. Yeah, this is not something that it's serious. That's what I mean. When things actually become not politicized, which is just about never. That is a pretty big move. Yeah. You need to keep yourself aware of, and very rare in our country. Right. All right, folks. As always, support the work of the ACLJ at ACLJ.org. We have a matching challenge right now, and that is a critical time for us financially. It's to double the impact of your donation at ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org, and again, it's a great time to support our work. It's all up at ACLJ.org. And again, with any of your donations, so $25 donation, that triggers a matching $25 donation. So it's like $50 for us. Be involved if you can. Donate today at ACLJ.org.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast. Whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison because of their faith in other countries, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily, 5 days a week, 1 hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. We want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ. And when you do that, you're supporting our production teams, our videos, whether it's that kind of production and other things that we are working on. The ACLJ is front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to ACLJ.org today. That's ACLJ.org.
Keeping you informed and engaged. Now more than ever. This is Seculo. We want to hear from you. Share and post your comments or call 1-800-684-3110. And now your host, Logan Seculo.
Welcome to Seculo. This is Logan Seculo, joined by executive producer Will Haynes, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to be hitting a lot of topics. We're going to have some great guests, a lot coming up, Will.
That's right, and we really wanted to focus on some of the foreign policy stuff today. Earlier this week, we focused a lot on some domestic things, on some politics, whether it be 2024 or the bank issue. But we also don't want to neglect that there's a lot going on in the foreign policy world. And a lot of that has to do with China. We mentioned earlier in the week that China is making these ties, these big ties with Russia and with facilitating a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So we're going to have some of our experts on to kind of break down a lot of this stuff that's been going on with China and what it means really for the American people.
Yeah, and we couldn't have these experts like Mike Pompeo and Rick Grinnell. You know, you have incredible people from previous political administrations, White Houses, that have come aboard with the ACLJ, and it doesn't happen without supporters like you. So they're going to be joining us later in this broadcast, but we are in the middle of our matching challenge, and I don't want to lose sight of that as well, which we can't do this without you. So if you have a minute and you are thinking about where you're going to put your resources, the ACLJ is a great place to do it. All you have to do is go to aclj.org, make any donation. If you $5, $25, $50, so on and so on and so on, any donation made is matched by another donor who is out there ready to match. Essentially, they have pledged that amount and they are waiting for your donation. Once your donation is made, it unlocks their matching donation. So really great. It's a great time to support. If you ever thought about supporting our work, this is a perfect time to do it. Again, later on in the broadcast, we are going to be talking with Mike Pompeo and Rick Grinnell. We're also going to be talking about what's going on, as you said, in China, what's going on the international front. We do spend a lot of time on the work that we do domestically, but we have offices around the world. Some we can talk about, some we don't talk about. But you can find out so much more information. You can watch all of our incredible videos. You can read incredible blogs and news stories by some of these top leaders by just going to aclj.org. It's really simple. You go to aclj.org, download all of this content, read, get engaged. Not only just support the work, obviously follow us on our social media platforms and all of that, but there is a treasure trove of content there that I think a lot of people maybe take for granted.
And a lot of the experts you hear on air here or on our social channels also are writing for the website. So not only Mike Pompeo, but Harry Hutchison, Wes Smith, Jordan, and your dad have articles up all the time about all this content, about all these stories, about all these policy issues that we care about and are engaged on, as well as things like the victory we saw this week where we got a consent decree against the Smithsonian. None of that can happen without your help at aclj.org by making that gift.
Well, in this broadcast, we try to break down a lot of it, and same with on the website, into sort of, terms we can all understand. It's easy. We're a legal organization to get caught up in sort of the legal mumbo jumbo that maybe you're not comfortable with. You read and you go, I don't know what this means, what that means. We have a great team of writers who take some of these expert voices also and make sure it's actually understandable. That's something that I find very important. We have great writers who can break it down for you and for me. So us who are not lawyers can really understand the incredible work that's going on and find out stuff about like what's happening in China, the influence that they're having on our nation, and what we can do to help change that and change minds here at the ACLJ. Again, I want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ by going to aclj.org. Go there right now. Make a donation. Your gifts are doubled this month. It doesn't mean when you give $10, you're getting charged $20. It means when you give $10, another person, another incredible donor, another incredible ACLJ member matches that donation, and we couldn't do it without you. So again, visit aclj.org. If you're watching on Rumble right now, I encourage you to hit that follow button and to tell your friends because we're growing and growing on Rumble. I want to thank them for all of their support over the last few years. An incredible operation going on there. Really like those guys over at Rumble. All right, we'll be right back with more on Secular.
The Freedom of Information Act allows people to petition their government and ask for the background information as to why they came to a certain decision.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
We are entitled as citizens of the United States to know about how our government works.
Government agencies acting out of control.
They want to keep Americans in the dark. That's why it's incredibly important to have the ACLJ constantly pushing to find out what the background information is.
Do you remember the Iran deal? There was a video about what took place on that deal, and it was edited. And the edit took out the key part of what was going on. State Department, White House, editing videos, to keep it from the American public.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that. And because of it, it's a very weak government agency that used to be the scary government agency.
What the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. Because of the litigation we engaged in, it's a different agency. They can't do what they were doing before.
We've got the declassified list of Obama administration officials who started asking to unmask. And they've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
All of this information came because we went to court to get the information.
The power of Washington, D.C. only works when the rest of us, the rest of Americans, are kept in the dark.
We may find one item of information in thousands of documents of irrelevancies, but we persist and we're on it every day of our lives.
The work that the ACLJ does matters. It matters to policymakers. It matters to ordinary citizens all across America.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Think we haven't been on this, folks? We've been on it.
Welcome back to Secular. We are joined now by Senior Advisor for National Security and Foreign Policy, former Acting Director of National Intelligence, among many other things, Rick Grinnell. And Rick, we're going to start this one off with a pretty interesting story that came out over the weekend, and that is that China, you have a couple different players in this space. Maybe you don't want to hear these three together. And it is what happened. China has brokered an agreement between, some longtime rivals of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and I wanted to get your thoughts about that when China is the one trying to cool tensions and what that could mean on the global stage.
Well, it's very troubling. I don't accept any of this premise that somehow China is now leading in the Middle East. I think that they are trying to make a move, and they've been trying to make a move around the world in a lot of different places. But this is just a really signal for the United States to wake up, for the Biden administration to wake up. You know, we've seen Anthony Blinken really struggle to put forward diplomatic solutions. Certainly, we've seen it in Ukraine. He's been completely silent. I'm beginning to believe that the Biden team at the White House actually doesn't trust Anthony Blinken. And so here he is once again being outmaneuvered by the Chinese with this diplomatic win for the Chinese. I don't think that you can characterize it any other way when Saudi Arabia and Iran joined together via the Chinese with Chinese ideas and Chinese pushing and pressure. It's very troubling. And Americans in our Congress needs to wake up, and Americans need to be pushing our Congress to get more involved. I'm very uncomfortable with allowing the Chinese to make this move without having a move from the Americans and from the State Department.
Rick, one thing that concerns me is during the previous administration, things that you were very much a part of, the Abraham Accords, they were historic deals of bringing Gulf states together with Israel in new diplomatic relations and things that we had not seen forever. And it was historic. Now we're seeing a country that had been kind of mentioned in that role. If there was maybe 4 more years that we would see a Saudi Arabia having better ties with the nation of Israel. But what we're seeing here is instead Saudi Arabia have diplomatic relations restored with Israel's main antagonist and enemy in the region. And what does that tell you about the lack of American influence and strength in the region, but also what does it mean for Israel?
Look, I think that it's a real warning sign for the Israelis. I think they see it as that. You have this entire media in Washington, D.C., from reporters as well as from the political class, all saying that Donald Trump would bring in World War III. The reality is that Donald Trump brought peace and Joe Biden brought in the beginnings of World War III. This is, I can't say it any other way other than a disaster for America on the world stage. We've dialed back our movements. We are allowing our allies and others to really go unprotected. When you see Saudi Arabia and Iran joining forces with the Chinese, this is a red alert. This is a huge warning. Anthony Blinken should be fired. He's demonstrated multiple times that he doesn't know what he's doing. He is unable to put forward peace agreements, and we see the world getting in more chaos because of this Biden team. I mean, let alone the banking problems that we're having this weekend. I look at what's happening on global affairs, and I'm just as concerned with the crisis.
Yeah, don't worry, Rick. They're blaming that on the previous administration as well. That's just what happens here. They only had a few years to figure it out themselves. We got to keep blaming. We got to do that. It's always got to be what happens in politics. You got to blame the previous administration. It doesn't matter how long ago it is. Doesn't matter how long it's been. And this happens in situations when people have very short memories. When some of my friends who are more liberal leaning said, I'm voting for Joe Biden. I can't vote for Trump. I can't do this anymore. They specifically said, well, why would you vote for him? I go, well, do you remember ISIS? Remember, remember the terrorism that was happening across the Middle East? Now remember the Abraham Accords? Remember that was sort of a positive move? And guess what's going to happen? 6 months from now, you're going to start hearing about ISIS again. You're going to start hearing about terrorism again. You're going to start having this world in chaos. And what happened? From different threats this time, not only those threats, it starts popping up because it seems to be that this policy just brings that right back. But Americans have very short windows in terms of almost trauma, where they forgot that during the Obama years, how crazy it was when it came to terrorism, and how quickly that ended during the Trump years, and how it was almost a shock to them that this could ever come back.
Look, I think that you're exactly right that what we have going on right now is not only chaos on the world stage, but massive spending from the U.S. taxpayer. We're paying to the tune of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars for the war in Europe. And we now see that this entire situation is making us less safe. You look at the police, you look at our border and the crisis that's happening in South America because of this. You look at the Pacific with China bullying Taiwan. I can't think of an area of the world that is less secure under Joe Biden.
Rick, you mentioned the bank crisis over the weekend, and I wanted to get your thoughts on that, as they did try to push a little bit of the blame on the previous administration, but when in reality we've seen uncontrolled government spending, out of control Biden inflation, and then we see the Federal Reserve having to try and keep up by raising interest rates at an unprecedented and historic rate. What were your thoughts when you saw this happening and the Biden administration's response today?
My first thought was I was hoping East Palestine had a bank. Maybe if it did, they would be bailed out. In a quicker response. But look, the reality is that the Biden administration has created this crisis by telling banks and corporations that they have to rely and emphasize on really faulty programs that don't bring in money, but that spend a lot of time. You look at this bank, Silicon Valley, and they had massive spending loans for climate-related companies. We're talking to the tune of 1,500 alone on the climate and energy issues. And then you look at their programs, and they had, diversity, equity, and inclusion officers. They didn't hire a risk manager for a very long time, but yet they were advertising for more DEI positions. They had the emphasis. The management had the emphasis on all of the wrong things. And that was in order to please Washington. When Washington comes forward and says you got to have these diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and then you have banks racing to do that while canceling anyone who's related to the Second Amendment or canceling anyone who's a conservative, I think that your priorities are in the wrong place. And lastly, I'll just say this. I actually thought that we were not going to be bailing people out anymore. The rules keep changing in Washington. Sometimes the big ones get bailed out, and they're called, too big to fail. Well, now we have too woke to fail. If you're a real woke bank, then you're going to get the money. And I think we got to have consistent rules.
Yeah, we'll keep a track of that too, and we'll be watching that. Thank you, Rick, for joining us. It is an important time to discuss some of these issues because you heard from Rick. You'll hear from other experts this week. It's not necessarily always cut and dry. Well, people have a lot of different opinions on this. While you may agree that we're glad that the consumer was protected in this situation, there may be ulterior motives that are happening, and you've got to always keep an eye on that. When you had clips like that we played too from Biden saying, we're going to find out why. We're going to find out who did this and what did this and what caused it. You got to make sure that what he's not saying is the target's now on you.
And we had an interesting comment from Rumble from Kay Cole, who said, I'm a retired banker that worked for big banks. This bailout is all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that does definitely play into some of the rationale of how quickly they jumped when a lot of the depositors are friends of the left. I do think that it's not all that. I do think that there was concern that this would have a ripple effect, but
it would have, because I'll be honest, I was getting text messages from people in Alabama saying, do I need to go pull my money out of my bank account? So it's not all just coming from Silicon Valley. But I understand why you could feel that way. It feels that way on a lot of issues right now. But again, we're going to take your calls, 1-800. Let's say it one more time, 1-800-684-3110. If you're watching right now, you can see the number right there. It's not that hard. It's just a few digits. You can call in and be on the air. We're going to take those coming up in the next segment as well. I've been saying support the work of the ACLJ because it's a matching challenge. It is, but what I'm actually going to encourage you to do right now is have one ask right now, one thing. However you're watching, if you're watching digitally, subscribe on that. So subscribe on YouTube, if you're following on Rumble, whatever it is, engage right now.
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions.
That unborn child has human rights, a life that deserves protection.
We win when we talk about the basic value of we just want to stand up for the rights of children, not only to be born, but to be able to live a healthy, productive life.
The justices heard arguments yesterday over a Mississippi law that bans abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. This is the most significant challenge to Roe v. Wade in decades.
It's wrongly decided they should go fix it, just as in the great historic cases have been fixed before.
Is there anything in the Constitution that guarantees abortion? No, there's not.
They don't view life until that child's outside of the womb, yet they control the exit point of the womb.
The fetus has an interest in having a life, and that doesn't change, does it? From the point before viability to the point after viability.
If one respects our Constitution, then Roe can't stand.
There are liberal scholars that have said Roe's underpinnings were constitutionally suspect.
No, it's a horribly decided case.
Abortion policymaking should rest with the elected legislators and elected governors to make those decisions on behalf of the people.
Breaking news, we have just received word of a decision in one of the most consequential cases before the Supreme Court in decades.
The court essentially says today that Roe and Casey are gone.
This will be a patchwork of differing laws. This kicks off an incredible legal fight, Jan. I know you've been following this in the states.
It's going to be Atlanta, the state capital. It'll be in Montgomery in Alabama. It'll be in Albany in New York, in Sacramento in California. I mean, this is what it's going to be.
There's about 10 or 11 states we're going to have to really fight for life.
Shouldn't we stand up for life? Shouldn't we do that most basic thing as a culture?
We are in the matching challenge, folks, and obviously we now have a state-by-state fight.
It's a great time because you can effectively double the impact of your donation. Do it at ACLJ.org. That's ACLJ.org. Welcome back to Secular. We're taking your calls to 1-800-684-3110. We're getting into the economy. So we've hit a lot of issues. President Trump and this potential indictment. And I say that because the grand jury invited him in New York, this is a New York State issue, to come testify. Usually, and that's just based off legal practice, someone who is the target would get that opportunity right before an indictment is issued. Now, right before does not mean today, but imminent, more imminent. And it doesn't mean 100% either. The grand jury decides that. But I will say that's how the DA approach things. So you have this opportunity to address the grand jury, kind of like if it does actually make it to court, you would have an opportunity to address a jury or the courtroom. You don't always do that, but you do get the opportunity. And usually that's in a situation, again, you have to weigh a lot of different factors. We all watch all these criminal cases now all the time. Now, this is not certainly a multi-murder wild family story like the one out of South Carolina that was so unfortunate and sad. But people see I think, understand what we're talking about there. So we talked about that. We talked about, again, the COVID origins, the way that the lash out occurred. But I do want to spend more time on the economy because it affects every single one of us. So Harry Hutchinson, Director of Policy. Harry, new job numbers came out today. They were released. The Biden team, of course, is touting this as wonderful news. But the truth behind the numbers isn't so great.
Absolutely. So it's clear beyond question that the unemployment rate rose slightly. So there's not much to cheer about there. Number two, the evidence shows that average wages, adjusted for inflation, have actually fallen. So there's not good news there. And thirdly, we should keep in mind that the Federal Reserve is preparing to raise interest rates again. That means mortgage costs should likely rise. And lastly, President Biden has issued a new budget proposal. And essentially, the budget proposal consists of an increase in income tax rates, federal capital gains tax rates, Obamacare rates, that's the Affordable Care Act, the tax rate on stock sales, property up, corporate tax rates up, taxes on fossil fuel companies up, which should drive up energy costs. So I think the Biden administration will term or claim that this proposal is simply a tax on the rich. But as people pay those taxes, that means they have less money to purchase goods and services. This affects everyone.
It does affect everyone. We actually have a call coming in right now kind of about this whole situation. Let's go to Mark, who's calling on line 2. Mark, you're on the air.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm Mark. I'm in Michigan. I crunch numbers for a living, specifically financial numbers. And about 5 years ago, I decided to figure out, okay, how much does the country have to take in and or cut spending just to break even so the national debt does not go up? I don't remember, it was 5 or 6 years ago. But what I found was you had to combine two things. An across-the-board cut in total spending, and I don't care what budget item it is. I don't care if it's Social Security. I don't care if it's military, I don't care if it's, social programs. You had to combine that with an increase in tax revenue of 25% just to break even.
Well, I think, again, I'll go to Harry Hutchinson on this because people try to say, okay, how do we get back?
Like, how does it ever even out?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't feel like that's the way our
No, because even
works.
when they increase taxes, like on the 25%, minimum tax on the richest in America, that it still doesn't balance out the budget. I think even there, under the best estimate, it cuts $3 billion out of the national debt.
I think that is correct. And one of the things that the Biden administration fails to understand is that with respect to some of these proposed tax increases, those tax revenues associated with those tax rate increases are optional. Why is it optional? Well, you can defer selling property. You can defer selling stocks. So the projected revenue often does not match the actual revenue that comes in. And so at the end of the day, middle income people, working class people are often hurt by tax increases, even if these tax increases are allegedly aimed at the rich. But I go back to the reduction, if you will, in tax credits that they are making available for fossil fuel companies. This means they are paying more taxes if they're making money. But of course, one of the ways of adjusting for a tax increase is to raise the prices at the pump. So I think at the end of the day, it's important to keep in mind that the cultural elites, our cultural overlords in Washington, they don't really understand economics, but the Biden proposal is probably dead on arrival in Congress. That is the good news.
When we talk about all these economic issues, Harry, as well, I mean, people really just want to know, are we going to see continued interest rate hikes, and is there any end in sight? I mean, some people have talked about 10% as maybe the end in sight. That seems pretty catastrophic to a lot of people.
I think you're right. I think my basic guesstimate is between 8 and 9%. Keep in mind that interest rate increases by the Federal Reserve, they don't have that much of an impact on the economy until about a 6 to 9 month lag time. So the Federal Reserve has announced this week that they intend to remain aggressive with respect to interest rate rises. And so one of the things that Americans should keep in mind is that that means their mortgage rates will rise. And some Americans have adjustable rate mortgages. And so even if they are not buying a new house, or even if they're not refinancing,
buying a new house.
Absolutely.
Because your mortgage payment could have doubled. I mean, a lot of times right now, whatever mortgage you're getting is probably on the same price houses. It could be near double what you're paying monthly.
That's wild. A lot of people had a lot of comments and a lot of people came in. I want to thank everyone who's listened and watched today and watched this week. We know we have a lot of new viewers who've come in via Rumble. We know we've had a lot of new viewers that have come in through all of our different platforms and social media platforms. I'm going to ask you one more time. If you don't mind, if you are brand new to this broadcast or you haven't done it yet, if you're watching on Rumble, hit the follow. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe. If you're on Facebook, like, do all those things. However you want to engage with this show, the better. Rumble is a great source. They've been great to us, and we appreciate all of their support. So if you could, follow us there. Follow us on all our other channels. But again, we are at the really starting to be in the middle of our matching challenge. Very important time.
That's right. So as we get towards the middle of the month, it becomes that much more critical. Our matching challenge is a way for us to really put together the financial situation that we're in as the ACLJ moving forward, so that we know if we can add additional resources. Can we add if we need more staff? If we need to take on a larger case, it's going to require more staff or issue. All of that is because of your financial support to the ACLJ. And of course, it continues to do all the work that we already do. So we have these matching challenges where a group of our dedicated donors say we will match the donations that come through this month. It's very simple, Logan. I mean, it's like if you made a $10 donation online at aclj.org right now, that $10 will be matched by a $10 donation from one of our donors this month. That's right. So it's $20 for us. So whether you've had to even cut back some on how much you can give, this is a great time to donate if you're still in a position to donate at all, because you're doubling the impact of your donation. So you're making what you can give, the value to us is doubling. So I hope that encourages you, even if you're in a tougher situation right now, but still trying to make those contributions to groups you care about. Do it online at aclj.org. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The report is coming out. It shows that not only did Tea Party groups get more scrutiny, but so did a host of other conservative groups.
It was something that no one could believe our government was even capable of doing, and now they were admitting it.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history. To take on the IRS and win, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue.
Barbara, I am here at this site because there are thousands of people and millions across America that say abortion's murder.
When you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side of history, you're on the right side of law.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this, are fighting for life to beat back the abortion juggernaut.
It's very important that we remain hopeful that the courts that the Trump administration was able to impact will give us good rulings that are based in law and sound reasoning.
This is one of the social issues we're winning.
There are historians that point out that religious persecution is at its highest level since the first 3 centuries when the Roman Empire led religious persecution.
A mid-state pastor's family is fighting to bring him home.
We are getting my husband after 7.5 months.
Turkey should not get away with holding my father one more day.
When Brunson was finally released, who meets him at the airport at 2:30 in the morning? Rick Brunell.
I saw Pastor Brunson walk down the stairs of the plane. I was filled with emotion. I told him that we were praying for him. The American people never forgot about him.
I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.